In part 2, we left off at a point where Steven Callahan is undergoing some serious stress, physically and mentally. He was woken up with a violent thump to the underside of his survival raft and spent a good portion of time fending off a shark that had taken a particular interest in him and repeatedly attacked the raft. Once the shark attack subsided, his hope was ablaze anew as he saw a ship off in the distance. Sadly, for whatever reason, the ship never managed to spot him, and our castaway now finds himself having 6 less flares. With that brief recap out of the way, let's get back to his story. February 19th, 1982, day 15. Callahan eats his morning meal and begins the daily routine of being assaulted by the school of Dorados that have taken to following his raft. The Dorados hunt down flying fish, and Callahan takes these opportunities to rest from their daily attacks as well as hunt. He's also beginning to worry about fishing because each time he does it, the chance grows that he'll damage either the spear gun or the raft, both of which he can't afford to break if he wants to stay alive for the long run. Callahan's mood ebbs and flows with the sun. During the day, he feels optimistic and confident about his chances, but at night the negative thoughts return. If one thing goes wrong, he's a goner. February 21st, 1982, day 17. The shark attacks have stopped for the last couple days, a welcome respite from the fearsome predators. On today's menu, Callahan collects barnacles and turns them into what he describes as a, quote,
slightly crunchy soup, which I drank from my Tupperware box.
He also decides to eat the fermented raisins that have been sitting soaked with salt water in a plastic bag for the last 17 days. This would be the last bit of food that he has from any kind of land prior to sinking the Napoleon solo. Callahan spends the bulk of his energy tending to his equipment, lashing mirrors and a strobe light to the man overboard pole, and patching up any leaks that he finds. By his calculations, he believes he's about a fifth of the way to the Caribbean islands. A scary thought. At this point, we go on a pretty decent run where Callahan doesn't document much of what happens on which days, so I'll just talk about the highlights in this time without any solid dates tied to them. Callahan spots another ship and fires off 2 more flares, and nothing. He reminds himself that things will be okay, and that he's doing everything to the best of his ability. At some point, Callahan also names the life raft the Rubber Ducky 2. February 26, 1982, day 22. He's managed to kill another Dorado, and is able to clean and process the fish very effectively. He doesn't let anything go to waste anymore. He eats the heart, liver, eyes, and the invertebral discs between the vertebrae in the fish's spine. On this day, a rogue wave hits the raft, and while it doesn't do much more than scare him, it reminds him that the sea gives quarter to no one. February 27th, 1982, day 23. The winds whistle as they race past the raft. The sea begins to have 10-foot waves regularly. At some point, he sees something off in the distance, and as he rides up and down the waves, one of the times that he crests it, he sees a ship off in the distance. That makes it Ship 3 that he's seen so far in his time adrift. As he takes a harder look, he realizes that there's no chance of him being picked up and saved. He sees the tail end of the ship as it sails away from him. March 3rd, 1982, day 27. Callahan pushes the pump hose into the white valves inside the raft and begins to get to work. He says that up until now, 60 pumps of the pump hose at noon, sunset, daylight, and morning was enough to keep the raft comfortably inflated. Now that number's 300. At night, he fixes his heading using the constellations as his guide. There's another gap where there are no specific dates, so I can't give a totally accurate account of what happens when, but in this time frame he does see another ship. Callahan also begins to worry about his digestive system because he hasn't really had to use the restroom, and a hemorrhoid's popped out. He's worried if he suddenly has to go to the bathroom, then he may rupture the hemorrhoid, which would be an exceedingly difficult thing to patch up and pray that it heals. So he starts doing stretching in hopes of healing the problem. March 6, 1982, day 30. On this day, Callahan chews on one of his world-famous fish sticks. He can't make it through the tough skin of the Dorado though, so he rakes his teeth off of it in order to get to the meat. When he does this, he feels a stabbing sensation. Part of the cap that covers one of his front teeth has broken off. March 7th, 1982, day 31. The hemorrhoid that was beginning to worry Callahan relaxes and subsides. We also learn that in Callahan's preparation for his sail from the Canary Islands to Antigua, he told his friends and family to expect him in Antigua around February 24th, but he'd also told them that the trade winds would be a little weak at this time of year, so it was possible the trip could take up until March 10th. He's essentially primed everyone to not be worried about his whereabouts until March 10th in the worst case scenario. Callahan begins to think about the ocean's top predators, the great white shark, and killer whales, and he begins to fantasize about the different ways that they'd capsize his raft and take him to a watery grave. March 8th, 1982, day 32. The cap on his tooth is totally gone. Water is constantly coming into the raft for Callahan to bail out, and waves smash into the raft, giving it more and more water for Callahan to deal with. He sits among the floating debris and yells,
You goddamn son of a bitch, ocean. Why me? Why does it have to be me? I just want to go home. That's all. Why can't I just go home?
Callahan's rational self tries to bring him back down to reality. Stop acting like a kid. You have work to do.
I don't give a damn about being reasonable. I'm hurt, hungry, tired, scared. I want to cry.
So he does. He does cry. In a different part of the world on this day, and completely unbeknownst to Callahan, his father is calling the U.S. Coast Guard and telling them that the Napoleon solo is overdue. March 10th, 1982, day 34. Callahan catches another triggerfish and Dorado. He becomes more worried about his gear. The last Dorado has bent his spear while fishing. March 13th, 1982, day 37. Spirits are down. The last Dorado he caught was unable to dry properly and went rotten. Callahan is also getting weaker and slower as time passes. Exercises that used to only take him 30 minutes now take him an hour and a half. He comes to the conclusion that doing the bare minimum will no longer cut it. He needs to be actively surviving, which means he needs more food. March 16th, 1982, day 40. Callahan's water supply is dwindling, but he has a few pieces of dried fish hanging in the butcher shop. Also, during this time, he's managed to hurt himself with a piece of line. He poked himself in the eye with the polypropylene line, and after a few days, it healed after oozing for a little bit, but left a spot in his vision which he constantly confuses for an airplane or a fish at the top of the water just beneath the raft. March 18th, 1982, day 42. On this day, the sea is flat and hot. He manages to spear another triggerfish and gets to work cleaning it. Callahan has spent a lot of time observing the school of Dorado that have followed him, and according to him, he's able to now pick out which ones are which based on their personality and looks. He manages to spear another fish, and there isn't any fight. He's curious from the lack of aggression on the fish's part until he gets a bit closer. the spear had gone straight through the fish's spine. As he begins to pull the fish up and out of the water, he lunges to grab after the fish, but it's too late. He looks over the edge of the raft, watching this fish sink down into the deep blue. At this point, the sun is gone, and the waters turn black and empty. He continues to stare down into the abyss. This concludes part 3 about Mr. Callahan's story. Part 4 will be out at the same time next week, and that concludes this episode of the podcast. I hope you enjoyed the episode. If you enjoyed it, then like, subscribe, and share the podcast with your friends. This is Myths, History, and D&D, and I hope you tune in next time.